Greetings, good people. It is your favorite public policy local government team. Thank you so much for joining us for our legislative session wrap-up. Mr. Deputy Peter, we made it.
We did.
Whew.
60-day session, more to come.
9 weeks.
It ain't over yet, but we're seeing where stuff lands.
So let's recap real quick. Just give us the deputy's download of how we got to where we are.
Well, I feel like this year has gone really fast and really slow at the same time. We
Most
didn't really
definitely
have a break from last session. When we had the whole select committee on property tax lead us out of the 105-day legislative session.
Right.
And then we had another irregular legislative session this year.
To say the least.
It's been a roller coaster. That's for sure.
This year, we always highlight how many bills are filed, how many bills pass. The last 2 years, so during the Speaker Perez's term, we had a fewer amount of bills pass. This year we had 1,896 bills and PCBs filed during the committee process. 237 bills passed in both chambers, which is fewer than typical. These last 2 years have been lower. Of those 237, 192 general bills. We track over 350 bills this session. I know we're always on lobby tools.
Always.
First 2 weeks were a whirlwind.
Watching for amendments.
Yeah.
Literally nonstop. Only to get down to 44 local bills?
There's the 44 local bills, and we had 47 bills from our tracker eventually pass both chambers that are now enrolled. So that means they're heading to the governor. I think a few have already gone to the governor. Even today, as of this recording, I think the governor just signed his first bill. So we'll be watching to see if the governor vetoes any of those bills. If he makes the bill, if he just lets them become law, he has 15 days once he receives the bills to make that determination. So we'll see what bills technically get across the final finish line now that they've cleared both chambers. Of course, we also had the preemption trackers. And we had a property tax tracker this past session where I think there were nearly 60 property tax bills filed.
And we still got to have a property tax special session.
Yeah.
Wonder what they're going to do with that.
It remains to be seen. I think they're still studying, even though it's been a year.
Peter, if you had to give this session a theme, what would you roll with? To highlight, I don't know.
Definitely say unprecedented. I mean, you could join the first session with the second session. Some people I know have started in the process in the last year, like myself, and I have yet to experience a real session with a real hanky drop. So I think the theme is definitely unprecedented.
Yeah, you definitely came in at a interesting time. Yeah. But even with property tax, government efficiency, just the chamber disagreement.
I know.
What?
Yeah, those two issues, property tax and government efficiency, kind of go hand in hand, right?
Most definitely.
The governor started the conversation over a year ago about wanting to end non-school or all homestead property taxes for Florida residents. That kind of snowballed into his executive orders last year on government efficiency, the DOGE effort. We've seen a lot of counties lean into that effort, participate in all of the requests for information that culminated in a report that they put together that was really focused only on a few counties, not all 67 counties. But then we saw bills get filed on those, and some of those we'll talk about today.
Yeah.
Right.
And then, the other theme, that the chamber disagreements, I think we saw bills pass one chamber, not get heard in another chamber.
Bounce back and forth. It was just ridiculous. I think Peter got a nickname this session, the Invisible Man.
Yes. When you're sitting in the gallery, you can be seen from the floor.
That was interesting. That caught me off guard, but it was definitely a first that I enjoyed.
You will always be known to him as that. That was funny.
But of course, there were plenty of bills that we tracked. We have our top bills list that we always put together to stay on top of all of the bills impacting local governments. And a lot of those bills, it felt like that list kept ballooning at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And then just kept growing. And then by the end of session, it started to, at least deflate or downgrade. The top bill that we were going to highlight here at this list was only filed in the House. It was county commissioner term limits. It's something that's been filed the last few years. This year it would have been for 12-year term limits, and it was not heard one time this session. The House had passed it off the floor the year prior, but this year the Senate didn't have a bill and the House didn't move it. That's a little bit different than the Blue Ribbon Projects bill,
Right.
That cleared.
That was a doozy.
That cleared all committees,
Right.
got to the Senate third reading calendar, and then stalled. I think that's one of those bills that we were, tracking down to the wire.
Literally.
With all the rural senators really putting their stamp on the conversation about what development looks like in their communities.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most, eye-opening, testimony on was definitely in rules and then on the floor. I mean, we had some senators really voice their opposition to it, especially when it comes to balancing rural and urban Florida. I mean, and the Senator McClain, did go on the record saying that growth management is a difficult topic to handle, especially when we have so many different interests in the state. But,
And it gave an appreciation of the senators working together and understanding that everybody's district does not look the same.
Right.
And you think urban, you think Miami-Dade, all the flashy lights and everything. And when you think rural, you only think, the small rural counties that, but just to see how they were able to understand and listen to Eric, who advocated for us and explained the different rule boundary and all of that for us to actually get this. I think it was definitely teamwork, a doozy, as you said, but most definitely a grateful accomplishment. And it just shows how when they take the time to actually understand, it gives you a greater appreciation for local government, and they get it and respect their constituents back home.
So we may see the Blue Ribbon Project bill back next year. I think the proponents are still dead set on looking at some large-scale development bill.
it's not over.
It's not over, but for this session, it did not pass, and so did the local business taxes. This is the repeal of local business taxes. It probably is a bill that gets filed every year. I know it's been filed every year that I've been at FAC. It did clear the House floor, but the Senate heard it at least one time, but didn't eventually pass it. Kind of like the local enforcement actions bill.
Yes, it was moving in the House. And that bill basically ties local government's hands for the processes for getting permits for small businesses locally, but literally it moved in the House, didn't do anything in the Senate, and before we knew it, didn't make it through. So it's when they listen. Same thing with HB 605 from Representative Steele. You're just literally wanting to strip the nonprofit expenditures from local governments. But I also, I don't think he realized or knew how many services and resources and how this, literally, that's how local government functions. That's how they provide HHS, human services, all of these resources. You take this away, what happens to our first responders? What happens to our shelters? And folks already had contracts and things in place on county levels again, but never even got a Senate companion. So that was something easy to push through. And then one that we've seen multiple times before, didn't get across the finish line this time, was 1586 and House Bill 1427, which was the Emergency Dispatch Consolidation Bill by Rep. Alvarez, trying to consolidate and pull everything into one. But one of the unique things we learned from this is that one size does not fit all. Sure. And some counties actually have great systems in place with their dispatch, with their 911 services, and emergency management teams. They already have things in place. They didn't necessarily need this. And for the large urban counties who did, there's still some kinks that we need to work on to push through. So, Peter, what about 1227 and 239?
Yeah, this is definitely the big preemption to the state. I know Jeff had a special nickname for it. If you want to take that one,
Vice and Virtue over here, but wait, there's more preemption in this bill. I think it cobbled together. We'd never seen a title like preemption to the state, just 5 different preemptions all in one.
It could mean anything. Yeah. Anything can be coupled up in there.
And then you had stormwater preemption, you had wetlands preemption.
Yeah, we had a couple of environmental bills that, we're going to have huge impacts. They were trying to rewrite the whole state, one on trying to, find a one-size-fits-all approach to, new stormwater installations, and the other one trying to preempt wetland buffer delineation and any upland activity upland of a wetland. So anything could have been under that preemption, and we wouldn't have been able to say anything.
And what about the Senate 180 fix? That was interesting.
If you're looking at this slide, you see a lot of bills that we were certainly opposing, or at least offering a lot of concern for. But the SB 180 fix was something in our legislative action plan in trying to correct the wrong that was made in land development, pause the restrictive or burdensome language. And the Senate did their part. They passed 840 off the floor. They even included it as an amendment to another bill. The House did a Hail Mary.
A little bit, yeah.
It came down to the wire.
A little Hail Mary, huh?
In trying to...
They said that they were going to take a shot at it. They did. Do you think that this is another shot that they're going to take next year?
Well, certainly on the retrospective application of SB 180, where it goes until 2027, okay. That portion of the bill. But then there's the prospective for future storms. So I do think it's something that it'll come back. The legislature has to grapple with, we want to get folks back in their homes as quickly as possible. We don't want to, government to be in the way of recovery, but at the same time, we can't have government not being able to update basic land development regulations to keep pace with growth. So that was something that popped up on HB 399, which was now we're going to kind of go to the next section of our report here, where we're going to talk about bills that did pass, and HB 399 was one of those, and it was a day 60.
And it was one of the last
down
bills.
To the wire.
and it did include the amendment from Senator DeSegli, and the House did try on SB 180 fix. It also had amendments that didn't get on there that we worked on in the final week, dealing with the rural boundary issue and on charter county vote thresholds. That was something that popped up in the House version of this. It never really took hold in the Senate. The Miami-Dade senators really didn't like any impacts on the UDB, urban development boundary in Miami-Dade, or the study on local county boundary issues. I love when they say local county as opposed to some faraway county.
Local county. It make sense.
But this bill did have a number of provisions. It started off as the development fee and compatibility bill, which we, along with other stakeholders, met with our counterparts at the cities, other developers. Before session, I think we got to an agreement on some of the language about defining what compatibility means in our comprehensive plans, and saying that for development fees, that the fees can't be based on construction cost or on site cost or the project value. So there was some common ground that we worked on, and we thought those, and they moved early. They were bills that got to the end rather quickly. But then, towards the end of the process, at the floor, it picked up a lot of other preemption. It picked up the Fontainebleau preemption on large destination resorts, so it defines what those look like, but then preempts the variance process for approval, in this case for a water park in Miami Beach. There were amendments dealing with composting that got picked there at the end, and one on interlocal agreements relating to schools.
Right.
And the last bit was on the manufactured and off-site construction preemption. So RVs in an RV park, a manufactured home can be placed there without restriction, and for off-site construction, so that homes could be built off-site but then be brought in and to single family. So this turned in, because of the title, land use and development can mean a lot of things.
Right.
So we see these trains, is what we call them.
I called it a lifeboat. A lifeboat.
Lifeboat.
Session, because everybody was clamoring to get on board.
Right. What about 803? Building permits and inspections.
Right. So this, and again, going with another major theme of session was growth management. We had a lot of bills. Each year we have bills dealing with permitting, shot clocks, and now private providers. I think, it's something with this bill. This was the private provider bill, and it has a number of changes to the private provider review system, timelines, how you can audit. It's worth going through all of the details on private providers, on caps, on the reductions in fees when you use a private provider. We will have to establish registration systems for private providers. We can't charge fees for that registration. So there are a lot of limits to local government authority in 803. It, also had language that we did get in there dealing with NFIP to make sure that they wanted when you're going for a permit for a project under 7,500, that you didn't need to pull a permit. Okay. Well, that could work. We understand we want to cut down on government red tape, except for when you're in a flood zone. And the community rating system through NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, requires you to document everything with the local government. So, we did have to work on a number of, issues in there, but there are some preemption. There's even design standard preemption on glazing in that bill. Some authorization for inspectors to come in from out of state post storm. Right. So again, a number of provisions in 803.
Jeff, I'm noticing a lot of this growth management is stemming from the unique position Florida has when it comes down to being in the path of a hurricane. I mean, everything seems to me 180, 803 seems to be kind of, growing out of this need when it comes down to housing.
And disaster recovery.
And that's the word, too, growing. We are a fast-growing state. The Sun Belt across the country. A lot of folks from up north are wanting to come live here full time. So we have to at least be more nimble. We have to, we've been trying to update our technology to turn around permits faster. And that's not going to change. I think that'll be something that we see again. This year, a lot of reform happened, a lot like the next bill on qualified contractors. This is another development-focused bill. A few years ago, we had a bill doing an expedited permitting on the platting process. This is also looking at establishing a process for pre-application review by qualified contractors. So we're talking about site plans, we're talking about plats and subdivision approvals so that they can bring in the engineers and other licensed individuals under the bill to provide, a private side enhancement to development review, and which it doesn't change, the local government's role as far as overseeing development, but enhances it for large-scale developers and others who are trying to just cut down on their carrying costs, because time is money in development. They wanted to have another, if the local enforcement agency doesn't have the staff to process those reviews, that they can move that a little bit more quickly. So it's no different the last few years dealing with the Live Local Act.
Right.
And now what? We're at 4.0.
Right. I think this is Live Local 4.0. We finally got 1389 across the finish line. The House version, after a couple of bounce backs, working with Senator Caladiud and Rep. Redondo. His was the one that got across the finish line, which expands the Live Local Act. What do we say? 4.0? Now 4.0 now streamlines development approvals. It further restricts local government zoning and expands eligibility for land, including public and religious properties, but also it adds fair housing protections and liability provisions, which is really, really big for our urban counties to make sure that they're good. But the county impact, it might increase administrative and permitting local workload. But as you said, Peter, it's a growing state. We just got to keep up and try and make accommodations where we can, serving our constituents on the local level as best as possible. But yeah, this bill just shows, Peter, as you said, how the state is growing. So we have to make accommodations through affordable housing to make sure that all constituents in the state are taken care of. And that brings us to government efficiency. In order to do this, we got to have local government finances, don't we, Mr. Deputy? But also, please, let us hear about your Doge experience this session.
My Doge experience and Peter's experience over the last year tracking the Department of Government Efficiency.
I watched a lot of press conferences.
Or Doge, or that other acronym that's been used over the last year. But this bill, HB 1329, is kind of in a series of bills that we saw come out of the Doge report and some of those recommendations from the governor and from the state CFO. This bill was really about local government budget transparency. It started off, we kind of read through it and we're like, this kind of reads like a vendor bill. A lot of the requirements were about an application that was dynamic in trying to put charts and graphs and comparisons of things where you'd have to go out and procure a vendor to make sure that you could post certain things. What the bill eventually was amended into is a bill about transparency and but a floor for budget requirements. So you will need to post a budget PDF with a certain time before the adoption of your final budget and your adopted budget. So included in this bill will be additional budget transparency requirements in your budget. You're going to need to put a PDF, and you're going to need to include, what are the major funds for revenues and expenditures? What are your reserves? And other baseline, we took standards from the Government Finance Officer Association's best management practices and in their awards criteria. So we're hoping to have more counties out there receive that award moving forward.
Now, Jeff, I do want to give our members some credit. I mean, what was the status quo before this legislation was,
Right. So in this bill, it kind of read like a vendor bill, and we thought that we were going to need to put in an application that was dynamic. Like someone visits the website and they have to, click something here and it changes information. What we really wanted was posting something that's easily accessible for everybody. We will have to also post a salary report, a quarterly salary report. Each for all employees that are funded by the county. So that may include constitutional officers as well. There will need to be a budget reduction exercise. So part of this is having a calendar of items that tell the public, this is when we're going to adopt our budget. This is when we're going to have pre-budget hearings, including a budget reduction exercise of 10% at least 14 days before final adoption. Also included in this bill, because this was the local government budgeting bill, it turned into finances. So what's that section? That's on impact fees. And we've seen this the last few sessions too. Changes to this definition of extraordinary circumstances. And what they did this year is they put a cap on extraordinary circumstances. So there's already statutory caps on how you adopt impact fees, when you adopt impact fees. And it's capped at 50% if you don't claim extraordinary circumstances. Now there's a cap on extraordinary. So it's meant to provide more consistency and phased implementation. There was also some language making clear that when a developer pays an impact fee, that they are refunded in a prompt manner. So, both of these sections of the bill, FAC did sign off on some of these changes, especially given where it started. But it's one of the few government efficiencies bills that we want to talk about. And the next one is on Senate Bill 1134, the DEI prohibition. And this is a prohibition for counties from funding or taking official actions on DEI-related items. So existing policies would be voided under this bill, and it restricts the contracting and grant spending of local governments. And where we were particularly concerned about was the process. There's this language in there about misfeasance and malfeasance, which are code for removal from office. So if a county spends money on DEI despite this prohibition, a resident of that county can bring a cause of action, and there could be a finding of misfeasance or malfeasance against county officials, which does include, it says county officials could mean staff, it could mean elected officials, but it's really going to just put a damper. Like counties will be less nimble in responding to their communities, whether they're just a lot. When this bill was discussed in committee, it was talked about like events. It was talked about the celebrations,
History Month celebrations,
or proclamations. We're gonna say we want to do a proclamation because our community it has a significant minority population, wherever that may be, or a certain immigrant population. So it's one we're gonna have to see how it plays out.
Long hours of testimony.
Right.
It was a bill that right. I think those went on for multiple hours, and it again was on this theme of session, which was what are local governments spending taxpayer dollars on? And the other one was an environmental issue.
Yeah, on the net zero policies. This is all part of the broader effort to turn over the stone and see how the state can save some money for Florida citizens. But this one was more tailored towards net zero policies and carbon taxes and assessments. It prohibits local governments from adopting any kind of policy, ordinance, mandate that says a net zero. And net zero pretty much is saying at a certain point in time, we are going to do everything possible to reduce carbon emissions. So it's these goals that organizations, governments, companies put into place to try to have good faith actions and solutions to try to reduce, carbon emissions that are harmful for the, the atmosphere over time. Now, there is an opinion that these goals are unattainable, that you are putting a burden on taxpayers when you have a goal that realistically, maybe you are not able to attain in 10, 20, 30 years because there are other actors besides you across the ocean that are doing worse than you are. And so really, what is the point? And so essentially what we were really concerned about was when local governments, they procure, let's give you an example, EV buses, or more cost efficient but
like
friendlier lights,
green
correct
building, yeah.
And so there was definitely some discussion as to how to make sure that is clarified. The House version did have a protection and a clarification that as long as these decisions are not made in an all-in approach, that is like we are picking these products only for this, as long as the decision is made on a kind of cost-saving presumption, we are safe. So we are happy that the House version did get across, but it got in there in a kind of interesting way, Jeff.
Yeah.
The Senate took up the tax package, which had the Senate version of
the
this
language.
bill, and it was discussed. Why is it germane?
Yeah, it's a good reminder that all bills are just vehicles, right? They're vessels for policy.
Right.
And what Peter talked about is that on the floor, the Senate replaced their tax package with the substance of HB 1217,
right?
And so really 1217 became the tax package,
the vehicle,
only talking about net zero. And I think you made another good point on this, is that it is a prohibition on that zeroing out of any carbon impact, as opposed to reducing,
correct?
Or having goals that go to limit, as opposed to a complete elimination of these policies. So it's something, again, I think all of these are going to be living and breathing. They may go through some tweaks or modifications in the years to come, but it certainly was a theme of session.
Right.
And on the other side of the ledger, on our expenditures is a bill that we've seen each year for the last 12 or so years.
HB 145.
Right, on sovereign immunity.
Before all of us.
Yeah, I know as well here before I got here. The last time a bill passed on making changes for the sovereign immunity caps or liability caps was in 2011.
Wow.
So what the legislature did this year,
years.
we had two very different bills. The House bill, the caps were very high, 500,000 and $1 million, so per claim and per incident. So we versus the Senate, which started at 300,000 and 450. The bill that finally did pass is 350,000 and 500,000, which did not include the changes in the House bill about settling above the caps. So this bill does head to the governor. It certainly increases our exposure to when there is a wrong. We're talking about tort claims here. By a local government. It could be, this isn't just, counties, it's cities, it's school districts, it's the state, public hospitals. So there are a lot of public entities that have exposure. We'll see if the governor does sign this bill. We were a bit surprised when the House backed off their position.
Right.
They passed their version of the bill week 1. The Senate.
I think it was like, do we want to keep doing this and with future leadership?
That's right.
It's
and so FAC did oppose this. At the last committee stop, we had been supporting the Senate bill as is. Saying but we still don't know what's going to happen on property tax, and that's we don't know what's going to happen with our revenue. But then on this side, our insurance costs are going to go up, or we're going to be paying out more claims. And again, these are taxpayer dollars, so we have to be good stewards in making sure that we can still provide for all the expenditures that our constituents look for. In other issues, I think we tracked a lot of health, safety, and justice bills this session. Tonette, you want to go through?
We did. We tracked a lot, and some actually passed. We'll kick it off with Senate Bill 168, the Public Nuisance Bill, which adds illegal gambling sites as public nuisance. It removes the caps, which was previously $15,000, I think, the limit on total fines, now allowing counties to levy larger penalties for ongoing violations. And it strengthens local enforcement tools. Another one, which was a big one this year, and great to see the unity across the aisles in both chambers. House Bill 277, Domestic Violence and Protective Injunctions by Representative Tendrich. It was amazing just to see the work that she did on this bill and the testimony of those coming forward. This expands use of electronic monitoring, strengthens protections and enforcements, and it increases penalties for repeat domestic violence offenders. And just to see her sharing her story, how this is how she got out, but also just the other legislators sharing their feedback and story. And while the county impact might be a little bit on the fiscal side of going up a little bit, you can't put a price on life, can you? And just to show again how she was able to work with the counties, work with the Sheriff's Association, and work with leadership to get this across the aisle to hopefully, protect those who suffer from domestic violence. And this will allow extra protection for the victims, but also allow the offenders to be monitored at all times. Another one was Senate Bill 984, Firefighter Cancer Benefits by Senator DeSigley. This passed, which expands firefighter cancer benefits eligibility. It adds ongoing death benefit requirements, and it shifts responsibility to current and former employers. So protecting our firefighters as they serve our constituents and residents across the state. And another two, which one was the actually policy vehicle, Senate Bill 504 and 506, respectively, by Senator Burgess. This creates a framework for code inspector body cameras. It is not a local government requirement, but for those who want to opt in, it requires training, data retention, and oversight. It also clarifies the legal treatment of these recordings and what can be done. And it also creates public records exemption for the certain body camera footage. So again, this is something protecting those who, again, work so hard on the local government level. So those were some moving in health, safety, and justice this session. What about the big Dex package, Peter?
Every year, that thing's a behemoth.
It is a behemoth. It had a lot of testimony this year. It had a lot of stakeholders. It had a wild day in rules. It definitely was a priority of Commissioner Simpson to go one step further in making sure that Florida farmers are well protected. But there was some concern. There's some provisions in there. One especially being the preemption on using gasoline powered farm and landscape equipment. There was a concern on whether that was going to impact noise ordinances. There was the clarification on the preemption that had already passed on the rural event venues permit. This was in the agritourism business. And then there was a lot of conversation on the surplus land, both at the state and local level. More so, the conversation in the legislature stemmed around the state surplus land because of the thing that happened last year on the Guana Preserve and the land swap. So pretty much saying that the land that is suitable for bona fide is gonna kind of be protected for ag purposes, can't be developed for future use. But if it's for ag, it can't be for conservation, it can't be for state parks. So there was that push and pull, definitely. And then there was the final big part of the tax package that was very important, is the legislature is intent on moving away from Class A and Class B land application of biosolids.
Okay.
And so they are trying to really find a way, or they are, implementing a prohibition on land application of Class A and B. Only Class A can be land applied. Moving on from 2028. There's an additional glide path for counties that don't ship their biosolids outside of their county lands. So, this is just a movement to move to Class AA. Class AA is a drier product, drier septage. It goes through a little bit more treatment. However, there is a lack of regulation to where it can be land applied, which I'm about to talk to momentarily as to legislation.
Because this wasn't the only bill that had.
Oh, it was biosolids year. Boy, did I have to learn a lot about biosolids.
So, and on those bills, in our environmental bills, there were two that passed this session. Tell us more about those bills.
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, there was just biosolids year. I had to learn a lot about biosolids. It's quite interesting, actually. But we had two bills that follow the DAX package because everything is, like I mentioned, moving to AA. One of them, it was by Rep. Boyles and Senator Gates. And it's pretty much saying that DEP cannot issue permits for land application if there's a treatment facility within 30 miles that can take in that product and dry it to a higher standard. So this is, based off of concerns across the state that, land application, while attempting to reuse biosolids, can lead to some issues sometimes if it's not handled correctly, if it's not land applied correctly. It could seep into the runoff.
Quality,
right. And then one step further was, and notice that they have the same title.
Biosolids management.
Yeah, they're all trying to manage biosolids and regulate a little bit of a safer situation. This one is the one that kind of, I think, complements the DAX package because it is attempting, or it is taking a stride in regulating AA. Because like I mentioned, AA before, I mean, it's pretty much fertilizer. Right. You can buy it in the store. And so there's concern, okay, so we're just going to start land applying this everywhere, no rules, no regulation. So Senator Bradley and Rep. Schoaf did a great job in taking in concerns from all stakeholders. It's got to be land applied to the agronomic rate. And it is more so trying to make sure that when there is land application, it's not just like, okay, we're just putting it on our land and that's it. It's not going to be just that's it disposal. It's got to have some connection to agriculture, to the agronomic rate, and make sure that it's seeping in correctly because there is a level that can benefit the environment
from this. And what about PFAS?
Oh yeah,
what happened with that this session?
So PFAS is the forever chemical. It is apparently in everything.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that's terrifying. But there's two parts to this bill. One of them is phasing out the aqueous film forming foam that is used, in firefighting situations. Is used in a lot of buildings, a lot of airports. Caused a lot of issues for firefighters over time. I know late Representative Joe Casello, this was one of his big priorities. Thankfully, posthumously, it has made it across the finish line, and they made it the Joe Casello Act, which was very touching. But the second part of the bill was mandating public entities to sample biosolids, and treated effluent for PFAS. Now, public entities are passive receivers of this product, and so the PFAS is going to be in there regardless. We are, as a country, as a state, as a society, trying to find ways to root these chemicals out. So we wanted to make sure that these entities were, there wasn't going to be any litigation, any questions raised as to, hey, you guys are the reason why this stuff is in here.
It's a shared governance issue.
Correct.
Local, state, and federal,
and so these issues were raised with Rep. Connerly, who was a great sport in working through this, and he said that was not his intention whatsoever. So thank you, Rep. Connerly, and definitely it's for informational purposes only. I understand that EPA at the federal level is in this moment trying to come out with rules to somewhat guide the process.
And
Right.
on a similar vein, like you have on PFAS, there's data centers and AI.
Oh, yeah.
What's going to happen between, in federalism, whether the state or the federal government is going to act
Who's going to
first,
take control?
or whether local governments are going to regulate. So we did have a data centers bill, or is it data centers bill, pass this session.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on what you're saying, a little bit of like, I used to ask my dad all the time, how fast things are moving. Can't keep up with them.
The Jetsons.
So data centers, this is an issue that is growing statewide. We're getting push and pull by both parties, sometimes a mix in each party. But this is pretty much a bill that is attempting to put some guardrails on data center development. These are these behemoth structures. There are smaller ones, but these are the ones that are needed today to fuel
Like
all
industrial
the
scale.
the industrial scale
Right.
AI systems, the ones that are becoming in much more frequent use. And so, within the past couple of years, these behemoth structures have popped up in states like Indiana and Virginia, and there have been concerns among locals and citizens alike that they are using too much electricity and they're passing on burdens to regular ratepayers, that there's a water consumption issue and that they're using too much water. And there's aesthetic impacts, there's traffic and impact concerns. So, I applaud the legislature for trying to get one step forward. However, like you mentioned, the president has stated his intent to really preempt states on AI and data center regulation. Thankfully, the president got involved.
Right, it's a good back and forth.
And
just
there was a
healthy
compromise.
reminder.
Right. So this is going to preserve local authority over the development of these data centers. It's going to require them to make sure that they bear the full cost of their electric service. And also, most importantly, make sure that they're using water correctly, using reuse and reclaimed water when feasible. So I think it is a healthy step forward.
Strong accountability.
Right, and preserve our local authority at the
Right.
end of the day. And that's why it was one of the bills that was included in our legislative action plan that was brought through our process, which want to just take a quick moment to review those. The data centers bill did pass. That was part of the FAC legislative action plan. Tonette had already talked about the code inspector body cam bill, which I think was in our program last year.
Yeah,
for
Volusia County.
And then the shade meetings for Burt Harris claims legislation, HB 655, did pass this session. That's going to give our counties the ability to have those shade meetings. They still need to record the information that occurs during the shade meeting when they're in the pre-suit phase on a Burt Harris claim. So you can have those conversations between the board, between your county attorney to make the best decision moving forward. The Senate passed the county administrator records exemption, but it didn't get across on the House side. They went for a broader, all local and state employees would have their records exempted. Personal identifying information exempted. But, so that did not pass. The solar issue didn't quite.
Well, I will say the solar issue didn't quite land where we wanted it to. However, there was a provision in the DEP bill that said that when you are trying to put solar facilities on ag land, they have to go through an additional hoop and follow stormwater best management practices, because I mean it affects stormwater runoff and all that. I was just passing by in I-10. I was like, well, that is a lot of solar fields. So there's a lot of concerns that go into it. Thankfully, some of the bill to get into somewhere else.
And a similar situation with the Southern Rail Compact piece. You know, we tried to get it. It was moving in the House, but no traction in the Senate. But we'll definitely keep working. It's always next year.
There's always next year, and just like on the offset, so for agricultural tangible personal property exemption, that will be on the ballot in November. It was something that the legislature sent to the ballot last session.
Right.
So this would provide the fiscally constrained county offset. So there's another session, and in order for the legislature to put in the implementation legislation or budget language in next year's budget, if that does pass.
There's still time. Yeah.
So there's still time on that one. So we'll be tracking those. I would think that maybe they get resubmitted during our legislative action process.
We'll see.
But, that kind of brings us back to the end here on what's still outstanding. We still...
The one thing that they meet for, a balanced budget.
Required.
But the certainty we do have is that they're going to be coming back after the Easter holiday. Pending allocations. They still need to agree on those top level allocations. That's why we didn't have a budget conference during session. So the budget's still outstanding. They have to pass a budget by June 30th to keep the lights on.
And it's like what, 113 billion in one chamber, 115 in the other.
Yeah, it was about $1.5 billion difference with the House being lower than the Senate. There are some major differences on how they get there. We'll certainly be tracking that, seeing if they resurrect the tax package along with that. Some of those big buckets of county funding that we normally track, we'll give you those highlights and information when we know more. But as of today, still no agreement.
To be continued.
And the other date that we have set on the calendar already is April 20th to the 24th for congressional redistricting. So the
unprecedented mid-decade redistricting.
Well,
I mean, California just did it, but
not just California. I think there's probably a dozen or more states.
Right, California, Texas, several. He's trying to run the play.
We have grown since 2020 after COVID and after everything. So, but it's crazy.
It is the purview.
We're living
of the
in
states
history. Yeah.
To set
we
those
shall
lines.
see.
Yep. And the last bit is on property tax. Since the House, did move forward with the proposal, but now that session is over, what they passed on the elimination of non-school homestead property tax is dead for now. The Senate never took up that proposal or one of the other 7 proposals, any of those proposals this session. That elimination proposal had a $9 billion impact to counties. The Senate didn't consider it. I think there was a lot.
What did I say earlier? They did a lot by not doing nothing. by doing nothing.
By doing nothing.
And the
governor hasn't either. The governor still hasn't released his proposal. I think he's calling for a special session. We believe that a joint resolution would need to be passed by August in order to make sure they can get the ballots right printed in time. But it remains to be seen what happens on property tax. But we shall see.
To be continued. So as we wrap up, guys, again, this has definitely been I would say fun, exciting, interesting, unprecedented 9 weeks, but we made it. Make sure you check out the FAC Public Policy Action Center by visiting facpolicy.com, where you'll find our final report, our bill trackers, the property tax report, and our weekly Fact Check podcast. Until next time, it's been indeed a pleasure, and we'll update you all after special session. Take good care.